Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of the Stickbow Chronicles, brought to you by Black Widow Bows. Yeah, this week I got a reoccurring guest on. Had a lot of fun talking to him the first time. We're talking history, and senior member of the Pope and Young Club. He's done a ton to preserve the history of archery. Gene Hopkins. Yeah, I think you guys will enjoy this. Hey, the I Hunt Close Trad Kill 2021, full swing, getting tons of stuff in, and I got to have a big shout out here to Stephanie Newman. I'm not sure what her married name is. I got to find out what her last name is now. But Stephanie Newman has been helping out over on Instagram, getting those trad kills up. Been a pile of first trad kills. Like, we did that 2 years ago. It was just first trad kills. Last year we did all of them. And this year we're doing all of them again, but man, we're getting a pile of first trad kills in. And another big shout out to Tevis Hull, his son. Tevis, I think it was episode 209 he was on, and he spoke about his son getting a goat tag in Idaho. And he stated that his son said it was stick bow or nothing, 13 years old. Yeah, digest that for a minute. But yeah, he killed a goat in Idaho with his stick bow, and Dad got it on video. So super cool. That was on Instagram. If you're on Instagram, take a look at it. I'm going to put it up on Facebook. It's an incredible feat. And I don't know, where do you go from there? 13 years old. So super cool. Get those sent into ihuntcloseofficial@gmail.com. And, yeah, we're going to be giving away a bunch of stuff in December. Let's see. I think that's all I got. Make these short and sweet. Big thanks to the sponsors. Selway Archery, The Footage Shaft, Cafaro International, Backwoods Grind Coffee Company, and, of course, Black Widow Bows. Take a look at that in the show notes. There's hyperlinks, and there's discount codes, so check them out. Y'all have a great week. Everybody that's hunting, good luck. Everybody that's getting ready to hunt, good luck. That's all I got. Enjoy the week. Roger out. Well, how's it going, Gene? Where are you at? Are you in Michigan?
No. I'm in southern Indiana, down in the pretty part of Indiana, down in the hills.
Well, kind of like east of the Black Hills is all Michigan to me.
Yeah, well, people think of Indiana, they think of corn and beans and flat and kind of monotonous. But, down here we've got some really pretty country, the hills of Brown County and, the Hoosier National Forest in the southern part of the state, hour north of Louisville, hour south of Indianapolis. It really is pretty here.
Well, how big is that national forest? Do you have any idea?
Oh, no, I don't know. It's pretty big, though. There's a fair amount of public land there. And some fairly decent hunting, but don't tell anybody.
Oh, I won't. Nobody listens to this podcast. Your secret's good. Your secret's good.
I have a lot of friends that hunt that and, get off the road. It's like anywhere else. Get off the road and use your feet and get back in there a little bit. You can get some pretty good hunting.
Nice. Give a little backstory on Eugene. You've been on here before, but we keep gaining new listeners. Tell us a little bit about Gene Hopkins.
Well, lifelong Indiana resident. Been bow hunting this would be my 51st year. Spend my life in the automotive industry, working in computers. And I'm just on the tail end of my career now, my working career. And I've always, for the last 20 years, the first part of your career, you try to build a house for your family and raise your kids and set yourself up for a little retirement. In the back half of your working career, you try to hunt as much as you can. And then now I'm just at that stage where I want to hunt all the time.
That's called retirement, isn't it?
That's you took the word right out of my mouth. But I hope my boss isn't listening.
How long before you retire?
It depends on COVID. Right now we're working from home most of the time. So, full pay, full benefits, work from home. I can swing that for a little while, and the other factor is medical insurance. I think everybody that gets to my age, I just turned 63 a couple of weeks ago. You got to carry yourself for medical for 1-2 years. That's some pretty serious outlay. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I got to figure that out.
You and I kind of kept in touch there this summer. You did a bunch with the Pope and Young.
Yeah, back in the spring, I was reading the newsletter like most other Pope and Young members. I'm a senior member, and I read where they had sold the building, and I immediately, things you start to think, well, what's that mean? Sold the building. What about the museum is the first thing that comes to my mind as a collector. And, I've been to the museum several times and I know what kind of collection they have. And it's really world class in the way they display the things and the story they tell, the dioramas, the wax figures of Glenn,
wow,
St. Charles and Ishii and Fred Bear and Saxon Pope and Ariane. It was just a first class museum. So when I read that in the newsletter, I thought, I got to find out. So I called and they explained, we've sold the building, but we're not selling the items, which is exactly what I wanted to hear. I don't want the items sold. I want the items kept for the club. And we're looking at entering into an agreement at that time. They hadn't announced it yet. They said, we're looking at entering into an agreement with a large outdoor retailer. Read between the lines. So I said, hey, I want to be part of this. I want to make sure it's done right. I understand the history. I know the history. I know the items. I can be of value to help with getting the museum packed and cataloged and moved. And they took me up on it. So they asked me to create a little team, and I called Joe St. Charles, Glenn's son. And that, obviously that was the beginning of the Pope and Young Museum, was Joe St. Charles convincing Glenn that, Glenn, with all your contacts and with all your history, we could start a museum. We could start collecting a lot of things from your early days and all your friends' early days, and we can turn that into a story of the early days of bow hunting.
Hey, let me
so
stop.
Joe is the one that actually got that started.
Yeah, let me stop you right there. Do you have any idea what year that might have been that Joe put a bow?
About 1980.
Oh, okay.
80, 81. Joe was fairly young. He's 2 years older than I am, I think. So at that time, he was fairly young, but, he saw that he had an opportunity there with his father and his father's connections. And he took full advantage of that. And they went all over the country and knocked on doors. And I was part of that. They called me one time and asked me to go on a road trip with them to get some stuff out of Cincinnati. And what a trip that was, to get to spend the weekend with Glenn and Joe and go talk to another 90-year-old bow hunter who had been bow hunting all his life and help collect those things to bring back and put in at that time the St. Charles Museum. And then the St. Charles Museum, as Glenn got older, realized that probably, we're going to sell the shop. The museum needs to go somewhere where it can be cared for in perpetuity. So they made an arrangement with the Pope and Young Club to acquire the St. Charles Museum and move it to Chatfield. And that was around 2000, approximately 2000. And so the Pope and Young / St. Charles Museum of Bow Hunting was moved to Chatfield, Minnesota. And now, with the selling of the building and the entering into an agreement with large outdoor retailer, i.e. Bass Pro, which has now been announced, the Chatfield Museum is going to be, the items are going to be moved to Springfield as they build the new building. And that's what I wanted to be part of. So that's why I volunteered, called Joe, asked him if he would like to get back involved in helping with that. And he said, yes, of course. So Joe and I went out, spent 3 different weeks getting everything cataloged, packed, loaded in the truck, semi, and eventually moved to Springfield.
So you guys
So
you guys moving all those wax figures and everything, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was significant. I mean, when you get in there and you walk through it and you see there's a lot of stuff, but you didn't go into the back rooms. You don't know how much stuff there really was. There was warehouses of stuff in the back rooms. that never got on display.
Really?
But the items that were on display were so well done. Look at Glenn Heisey and look at Larry Strife and Glenn's son, Kevin Heisey. They actually went so far as in the Ishii diorama, they went out to Deer Creek in California and dug up sand and rocks from Deer Creek and brought back and put that in the diorama. So came from the location there where Ishii lived. And the shavings on the floor in the Glenn St. Charles diorama, the wood shavings on the floor were actually wood shavings from Glenn's shop. Wow. The real thing. That's pretty authentic.
Yeah. So
we had to pack all that up too.
So as you're sifting through and as you're cataloging all that stuff, what are some of the pieces or artifacts that really you were like, holy smokes?
Well, I'm a real fan of the early days. The 50s, 60s, 70s, exciting, beautiful equipment. But I really get excited going back into the 1800s, early 1900s, 10s, 20s, and to go through some boxes that came back from Africa with Saxon Pope and Art Young, boxes that probably hadn't been opened in who knows how long, and dig through there and find things that they brought back with them that hadn't been cataloged, that hadn't been displayed. There were some glass slides. There was just a scorpion they brought back, and some other, items that personal mementos. And then, when Art went to Alaska and the snow goggles that he used were in the back room of the museum. Just some fantastic items. The Ishii arrow that was down in the front, and we had to disassemble because the exhibits were built into the walls. They weren't just hanging from the walls. They were built into the walls. Even the display cases were built into the walls. So we had to disassemble the display cases to get to the items in the display cases. And to take that Ishii arrow out, hold in your hand an arrow that Ishii made and used, or a Will Thompson arrow that Will Thompson had used, a hunting arrow with a broadhead. That's exciting. How many people get to do that? Yeah, it was a lot of work. I spent 3 weeks volunteer time up there taking off work and doing this, but what an opportunity that was.
Give a little plug for history. I mean, how important is it you see it. I see it every day coming through my Gmail accounts of how many people are getting involved and picking up a stick bow. Tell us how important it is to hold that history out in front of us and what that means to our future.
Well, to me, I do talks around different bow hunting banquets and annual banquets and shows around here and there. And I always use the analogy of, walking across the cornfield, looking down, and you see a stone arrowhead laying in the plowed field. And you reach over and you pick up that stone arrowhead and you pick it up. Do you just feel a rock in your hand? Just a stone arrowhead? Or do you get excited and you feel the spirit of the person who made that 4, 5, 10,000 years ago? And think about that person who made that 5, 6, 7,000 years ago. They were a real person. And then why is it here? Why did they lose it here?
Yeah.
Or why did it end up here? And so the story, that's what goes through my mind when I pick this stuff up. It's the story. It's not just an arrow. It's not just a bow. It's not just a broadhead. It's part of their life. So when I pick up a bow that was made by Will Thompson or Saxon Pope or Art Young, and you look at that bow and you see the marks in the wood where they actually were using a draw knife or a spoke shave or some kind of sand or, piece of sandpaper to finish that bow out. And you see the horn knocks that Chief Compton made. And you can look at a bow across the room and you can tell that's Chief Compton bow just looking at the horn knocks and the way he made the horn knocks. Such detail. So I feel the person, the spirit of that person is still there. And that's what excites me about the history of this stuff. And the other thing is that what you can teach people. The old story, those that don't know history are doomed to repeat history. There's a lot of education, there's a lot of experience that those people before us had to go through to get bow seasons for us, to get those seasons opened in Wisconsin and here in Indiana, and all the education that went with that. We got to keep that alive. We got to help perpetuate our sport through keeping the history.
Yeah, and for me, I like to kind of showcase what you do, what others like you do, a little bit to remind, the 20s, 30s, 40-year-olds that are just getting into it. It's quite a leap coming from, the compounds and all that technology. It's not, sure, you can say that the limb material and the string material and the arrow material are different, but in reality, it's still, if you can go back 100, 120 years, and it's still pretty dang close to what those guys are doing. You're drawing a bow with your own power.
Muscle power.
Yeah. Yep. And releasing an arrow. And it's pretty amazing that we really do have that connection that it's pretty dang close.
Yeah. Glenn St. Charles, I was pretty good friends with Glenn. When he and others were getting the Compton group started, Glenn and I were talking, and his strategy, he's a smart man. His strategy was so different than a lot of other people were trying at the time. At that time, there were a lot of people trying to force traditional archery into archery seasons, trying to force people into using traditional equipment. And Glenn told me, he said, that's not what I want to do. He said, I want to get people to see how much fun we're having. And I want to get people to understand. They look over and they see that group of people over there shooting their bows and how stressed out they are. And if they don't hit the dot, they freak out. They're not having fun. And then they look over here and they see this group of people shooting longbows and recurves, laughing and slapping around on each other, and arrows flying through a tree, miss the target. And they just hee-haw. And that's what I want people to do. He says, I want to love people into coming over and joining us.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. From the chair I sit in now and what I've watched evolve in the last 3 years that I've been really plugged in, I mean, that's really been my kind of take on things. It's like, because there are people out there that kind of browbeat everybody, like, oh, if you're not shooting a stick bow, you're not a real man, or it's not a real bow and all that. And I get it. I get what they're saying and what they're doing. But what's the old saying? You catch more flies with honey than you do vinegar.
Yeah. Or you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, or whatever.
No, that's Glenn, cool to hear that.
Glenn just nailed it. He said, if people look over and see how much fun we're having over here, they're going to come over here because they want to have fun.
And I do think that's a big drive for it. I mean, a lot of it is a success. You see some of the guys like Aaron and a few others that are having. South Cox have great success, so it gives people confidence. Like, well, it's not undoable, right? Because everybody's grown up with compounds. It's not that it's not doable, and these guys show them that it can be done. But I love to hear that that was Glenn's philosophy, starting Compton's, and I really wished he'd picked another name than Compton's. That's really difficult. It's just different. Who knows what? Not many people know who
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I've been doing a lot of research over the last 6 months. And every trail goes back, the center of the spoke was Will Compton.
Okay.
And it's just amazing, as I go down this trail about this guy, it comes back to Will Compton. I'm going to give you an example. I just picked up Howard Hill's snakewood bow. Horn Knox snakewood bow that he used in the late 1920s before Howard Hill was Howard Hill. And I looked at that bow, and on the end of that bow was Horn Knox said, those are Compton Knox. and I don't know if you know the book Don Carson wrote, and it was published several years ago, Early Adventures with Howard Hill by Don Carson. And Don Carson was a young man, teenager who was a protege of Howard's as Howard was building his reputation and building his career. So he got to grow up with Howard and got to see Howard go from a nobody to a somebody. And Don Carson ended up hooking up with Compton and spending time and shooting with Compton. And I look at those knocks on that Howard Hill bow, and I say those are Compton's knocks. So I think Don Carson introduced Howard Hill somehow into the two of them, and I think Howard Hill and Compton cooperated somehow on that bow. You can see it in that bow.
Well, I walked you right into that.
Yeah, thank you for setting me up like that.
I'd like to say I'm not crafty, but no. And I consider myself. I consider myself. Go ahead. No, I consider myself fairly well versed in history, and really, I mean, he must not get the credit he's due because, he was never on my radar.
And I understand. I understand exactly what you're talking about. But if every trail I go down in that teens, 20s era, he didn't die until 38, I think. Every trail I go down, Compton seems somehow in the middle of it.
And where did he originate?
Compton was born in Flint, Michigan in, you stretch my memory here, like 1868. And, then he famously lived in Nebraska, lived on one of the reservations, got the name Chief because of that, played with the native kids, and obviously they were shooting around with their bows and arrows. But it was a pretty primitive, as you would expect, Native American, not the D-section horn knock English longbows that he ends up with later. So he grew up in that Native American archery, get close hunting style. And then you got to bring in another spoke. Here comes the spoke from this guy named F.S. Barnes, who was born in New York, went to Minnesota, was a watchmaker, decided watchmaking was no fun, started making bows and arrows, ends up in Oregon, where he heard that there was some of the best yew wood in the world was coming out of Oregon. So he goes to Oregon and starts making bows in the English style, D-section, horn knock, English style longbows. This chap named Will Compton wants to, I'll use the word graduate, from the primitive bows to the more fine bows of the English style. Here's that the best bows in probably the world are being made now in Oregon by this guy named Barnes. A lot of the tournaments were being won by Barnes bows. He had a reputation that was growing worldwide. Compton goes to Oregon and learns how to make the English style bows from Barnes. Now Compton is becoming one of the finest bowyers under the Barnes style of making an English style longbow. Comes back to California, then we all know the Ishii story. Compton goes to meet Ishii. In the process, meets Saxton Pope. Pope had an interest in bows and arrows, but again, Ishii was teaching him native style, primitive, get close, learn how to call, learn how to decoy. Compton comes in and shows Pope English style equipment where now I can shoot 60, 80, 100 yards at York rounds and American rounds and more of the target archery, but now it's not 10 yards and under, I can shoot farther with my English style bows. Compton teaches Saxton Pope how to make those same bows. And I've got a couple of Pope bows here in the room with me, and I've got a couple of Compton bows in the room with me, and I've got a couple of Barnes bows in the room with me. So these three friends now meeting around this guy named Ishii, who came together and glued them all together. And then Art Young comes over and gets involved with them. So now we've got Compton, Ishii, Pope, and Young. And you can just watch through the style of their bows how their friendships and they learn from each other. There was an organization called the Archers Guild back in the 20s where I know how to make bows, you know how to make arrows, you know how to fletch, you know how to make broadheads. Let's get together and create a guild, and we'll all teach each other how we do our crafts. That's just fascinating to learn all that. You can just see these friendships in your mind. You can see these friendships growing and expanding. And if she dies, 1916, Hope writes Hunting with the Bow and Arrow, 1923, publishes that book on everything that Ishii taught him about his way of hunting, his way of making bows, his way of making arrows, is in that book, 1923. I don't know if I told you this story before, but it's worth saying again. Another young fellow named Doug Easton is out rabbit hunting. Shotgun falls over, discharges, shoots Doug Easton in the leg. He spends a year in the hospital, different surgeries, and a friend brings him in a copy of a book called Hunting with the Bow and Arrow by Saxton Pope. While he's laying in the hospital recovering from the wounds, he reads this book and he becomes fascinated with the sport of archery. Gets out of the hospital, starts making, I've got 5 or 6 Easton bows up here, early Yewood Hornlock Easton bows.
What year are you talking there now?
We're talking mid-20s.
Okay.
So now, everything that we love and everything that we do is just growing out of those encounters between those people. And Compton's sitting right in the middle of all that.
I stand corrected.
So I think, again, Glenn St. Charles knew what he was doing, right?
Oh, yeah. No doubt. No doubt.
He picked that name for a good reason.
Jumping way back in your story there now, I've been been devouring some Native American history. And when you're talking Will Compton, would you say 1868 he was born or thereabouts?
68, I think.
Yeah. And so then he moves down to the reservation. I can't imagine, like, if he's a white guy, what his job is or how he ends up on a reservation. That's what struck me as like, well, how'd that work?
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much of that time period. And, you go, people like Cliff Huntington are out there digging, trying to fill the gaps on all that knowledge. We have this, we know a little bit about this guy at this time, and we know a little bit about this guy 5 years earlier, but we don't know anything about them in the middle. So people like Cliff are out there and trying to fill the holes. Cliff's out there trying to fill the holes in the early days of Howard Hill right now. He's done a magnificent job of doing that with the Thompson brothers. But there's so much more information available to us today through the internet. Newspapers are being archived online. You can go into newspapers.com. You have to subscribe, but you go in there and you type in a keyword, Howard Hill, archery, and you can start to get photocopies of all these newspapers, 1920, 1925, 1930, and you start reading them, and you can start to place where people are at certain dates, and you can start to learn the history and learn the background, and learn the story, and fill in the blanks of all these people. And you can go out 6 months later and do the same keyword search, and there's more information because more newspapers have started to archive their information. So we're just, we're really in a golden age of being able to try to piece these puzzles together.
Wow. That, yeah. That, and again, it's so, to me, it's so important for, not necessarily that people have to know it verbatim, but just, the younger generation to recall that, hey, this isn't, this wasn't given to you with zero sweat equity put into it. There were some people that really worked to give us what we have today, and we're not far off from shooting the same equipment a lot of times.
Yeah. And, the other part of the story it gets to me is that this mindset of I've got to kill something or I'm not successful. And Glenn, another story Glenn told me more than once, several times, and I actually had his son Jay make a bow for me and name the bow A Walk in the Woods.
Oh.
And Glenn always said, I don't need to kill something. I don't have to kill something. Sometimes I don't even want to kill something. I just want to go for a walk in the woods. And if you can have that mindset in your heart that I just want to go for a walk in the woods, and if I happen to arrow a deer or a turkey or an elk, that's great. But I don't have to do that to have a great day.
No, and it's certainly good to, put that out there and make people aware of it. But I do think there's a progression in a young hunter that they need to put an arrow through something. That's a natural progression.
I understand that. We all did that. We all grew up through that. There was a study done by the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point 30 years ago, probably, about the evolution of a hunter. That's true. We all go through those stages. And the first stage is the shooter stage, where whether it's a 22 rifle or a bow and arrow, I want to go shoot this thing. And so then you progress through that stage to, I want to limit. I got to have 5 squirrels if the limit's 5. I got to have 5 rabbits if the limit's 5. And then you go through the next stage of the evolution is the method stage. Well, I've got to do it with a bow and arrow or a black powder rifle. And then the last stage is the experience stage. I just want to go for a walk in the woods. So it's natural. It's a part of the evolution. Just like you said, some people spend more time in one stage than the next. Some people jump real quick through the stages. Some people never leave the limit stage. But it's natural.
Yeah.
And, we should recognize that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think you and I talked about before, you mentioned Glenn a couple of times, and I think if you put a scoreboard up, Fred Bear is kind of what people think of the icon of traditional archery. But you and I talked about Glenn St. Charles, and he gets credit, but I think he was I think he was a bigger player than most people realize. You've already,
no doubt.
Explained some of that, but talk about him for a minute. Like, not just the Pope and Young, but even before that, getting the gears turning for states to get archery seasons.
Yeah, Glenn was in the state of Washington. His mentor was a fellow named Corey Duryea. And there's so much discussion and credit given to Wisconsin and Michigan and some of the states here in the Midwest for being the pioneers of bow hunting. But you go out to Oregon and Washington and even California, they were pioneering maybe even a little before the Midwest was. And Glenn St. Charles, Corey Duryea, Chet Stevenson, and some of those guys out there, they were getting their toes in the water pretty deep, working with the state fish and game agencies to get the seasons opened up. And Glenn started his business there in Seattle and was actually one of the innovators. He made his Thunderbird recurve in 1953 with a full working recurve limb, and made about 300, maybe a little less than 300 of those, and decided, what, this is taking time away from my hunting. This is too popular. And he got with Fred and said, hey, Fred, why don't you make a bow like this? And, then you look at 1954 and Fred comes out with a Kodiak 2 with a full working recurve limbs and the compass in the handle and all that. So the influence Glenn had on Fred was significant. And I think we talked earlier about the story of the Little Delta. Fred went up there with Glenn. That was Glenn's hunt. And Glenn invited Fred to come up there with him. I wish you could see. I've got the caribou from the 1957 Little Delta hunt that Glenn killed hanging on the wall right behind me.
No way.
Yeah. The St. Charles family allowed me to hang it here. And I've got the bow that Glenn, 1955 or 6, I think it might be a 1955 Kodiak Special, 60-inch Kodiak Special, which most people will tell you they didn't make one. They sure did. It's right here. That Glenn used to kill the mountain goat in 1955. It's on the cover of Archery magazine. But he was such an innovator in working with the fish and game agencies to get them to open bow hunting only seasons, but also inventing and making improvements to equipment over the years.
Yeah, that Bows on the Little Delta, the book Bows on the Little Delta. I think it's out of print now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's out of print. You can still find on the used book market. You can still find them. To me, that's the best book there is.
That's probably that is probably one of the only books I've ever read and reread. It's just fascinating to step back in time, and you look at all the gears. I don't do as extreme hunts as some people, but I kind of get after it, and I look at the gear list that I've got to have, and these guys are up there with basically just leather shoes with crappy soles and wool shirt and wool pants. Yep. And
they didn't have all the poly God knows what stuff we have today.
Oh, and just think of communications and stuff. I mean, no communication, as far as inReach or cell phones or any of that. You talk about high adventure. I mean, that's just straight up high adventure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and they go for weeks at a time. And I could, Margaret, Glenn's wife, you got to come back and say, what a lady she was. Glenn would go for weeks, months at a time and go on those hunts, and she wouldn't hear from him. And she was raising those kids, and, she loved it. She just really was so supportive of him and his lifestyle. And you got to throw Margaret out there as being somebody I really admire.
You mentioned some states, and I laughed because last time we talked, I was kind of pumping up Michigan, and you kind of put the slap down on me on how many how many names come out of Indiana. Rattle some of those names off.
Well, you got Indiana, the Thompson brothers, Will and Morris Thompson. You got to start right there. Witchery of Archery, 1878, and started the National Archery Association in 1879, and then you come up through Fred Asbell, M.R. James, Barry and Gene Wenzel went to school here.
You can't claim them, though. They went to school. You can't. They were passing by.
Yeah, they went to school. We'll still claim them.
You're going to put them in the win column.
Yeah. They spent time here. I was talking to Barry one time, and he looked at my name tag, and he said, "You're from Indiana?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Let me tell you a story about Indiana." He said, "We went to school, chiropractic school up in Indianapolis, and we used to go down around Brown County down there to hunt." I said, "That's cool. That's down where I live." And he said, "Well, do you know this spot?" And he started telling me where this spot is. You go up this long hill, and there's an apple orchard at the top. And I said, "Yeah, it's High Acres Apple Orchard." And he said, "Well, there was a buck. Gene and I were going hunting up there one time, and this buck crossed the road, and it was still dark." And he said, "I guarantee you, to this day, it's the biggest deer I've ever seen in my life. It was a guaranteed world record."
Really?
I said, "That's pretty cool, because that's a half mile from my house right here." I hope those genetics are still running around.
Who are the two brothers? Was there two or three of them that there's black and white videos of them shooting biscuits out of each other's mouths and shooting cigarettes out of
the Wilhelm brothers.
Oh, talk a little bit about that. I mean, if anybody's listening, just Google them and go on YouTube.
Yeah,
and it's unbelievable.
Yeah, Howard was making a pretty good name for himself doing the short little movies. You go to the movie theater back in the 40s and 50s, and before the main feature film would play, they would show these movie shorts. And it might be, raising money for the war effort during World War II, or it might be adventure shooting a bow and arrow, these little movie shorts. Well, Howard was making a pretty good name for himself doing these movie shorts. And Ken and Walt Wilhelm said, "Hey, I want a piece of that action." So they started making their movie shorts and trying to, be one up on Howard. And so go out, like you said, go out to Google Walt Wilhelm, Ken Wilhelm, and look at some of their movies. And the things they did with the bow and arrow, just unbelievable. And Ken couldn't use his right arm. He had I think it was an automobile accident, and he couldn't raise his right arm up to anchor like we normally anchor. So he would shoot from the hip, and he would shoot things off of his brother's head, or shoot a cigarette out of somebody's mouth, shooting from the hip.
It's the most unorthodox shooting style you'll ever see, and it's great camera angles. I mean, shooting that biscuit out of his brother's mouth.
Yeah.
And you mentioned automobile accident. We ought to see what they're doing. They were four-wheeling before four-wheeling was a thing.
Leapin' Lena. Leapin' Lena was the name of their old truck. It looked like the old jalopy on the Beverly Hillbillies, you know?
Yeah, and they're rallying
and that thing. They'd take it out in the desert and roll it down these mountains, and it would just go end over end down a mountain and crash at the bottom, and then they'd get in it and drive away.
No joke. If you listen to this podcast, stop right here and go over and look them up on YouTube. It's something to be seen.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah. What years were that? It had to be the 20s and 30s?
No, that was 40s.